Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. On the podcast, I seek out and interview entrepreneurs, leading business people, authors, tech leaders, academics, and generally cool people doing interesting stuff in the service and experience space. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. Before we get into the interview, I'd like to give a big shout out and thanks to all of the folks at Calendly for sponsoring the podcast this month. Calendly makes scheduling meetings easy and efficient, eliminating the hassle of back and forth emails so you can get back to work. It's used by everyone from small businesses to Fortune 100 companies, and millions of people around the world rely on Calendly to close deals, build better relationships with their customers, drive customer success, and grow their businesses faster. So do check them out by following the links in the show notes. Now, let's get back into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have a returnee, no less. And that is Adrian McDermott, who is the global CTO for Zendesk. Hi, Adrian, which sounds, I have to say this, it sounds weird speaking to somebody as a person named Adrian to somebody also called Adrian. So it's Adrian, meet Adrian. We did this before, but it is weird. But anyway, welcome. Hello. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Adrian. Good to see you again. Thank you for having me back. I'll try and do better this time.
Oh, no, I think you did ace last time. And what I was going to do is for people that aren't familiar with you and the work that you do, can you give us a quick thumbnail sketch of you, what you do, and kind of Zendesk and all that?
Sure. Zendesk is a customer service, customer engagement software company. We were founded in the beautiful city of Copenhagen in 2007 and have scaled from that point to have over 100,000 customers. We are based now in San Francisco and listed on the New York Stock Exchange at the moment. I joined in 2010 and have scaled sort of the product. I ran the product development org, so engineering and product management and product marketing for a hot minute and things like that. And I scaled that organization from like 10 to 1,500. It's now almost 2,000 at the moment. I focus more on sort of long-term strategic product direction and getting out there with our customers. We're living in, times of sort of CX change and turmoil. And I think that, the best companies of which we aspire to be really try to listen to their customers, engage with their customers, and figuring out, what is the zeitgeist in society. And because I think CX is where you meet your customers most regularly, and most importantly, what can we learn from them, and how can we evolve and scale the products and the offerings and the way that we engage using those that insight and the feedback that we get.
Awesome. Now, the reason that we organize this is because Zendesk recently published some new research. It's called the Zendesk CX Accelerator Report, which sorts businesses into 4 different categories based on your assessment of their CX maturity. So there's the starters, there's the mergers, there's risers and champions. So I know we've talked about this before. We talked about this 2 years ago, but I want to talk about this one kind of right now and kind of wanted to ask you tell me about it, why 2 years on, I guess, to repeat it, and kind of what are the big headlines coming out of it?
Yeah, the report actually, we felt like we got such good insight. We run it annually, and it's a good way to take the results from the survey that we run for our customers and adapt the questions, and then really use it to learn what it is that's differentiating those that are doing well in CX from those that are just up and coming, rising, or just starting out on their journey. It also tells us a little bit about the way that our customers feel about their customers' feelings about CX, right? I think, biggest thing we were hearing this year is that even, what we would call the CX champions are struggling to keep up with rising customer expectations. There's just unresolved queries are up 157% year over year. To me, that's surprising, right? Because, during the pandemic, as everybody went digital, we saw this massive increase in inquiries and connections and things like that. But it's really, there's a long-term and echo effect of that we're seeing at the moment. And so from a takeaway point of view, we're seeing that it's just not enough for companies to close tickets quickly. Those that are winning from competitors are and investing in balance of human and automated strategy. 75% of our CX champions have some kind of bot to human handoff strategy in place, right? Where there's some triage that's automated and then it moves forward. I think we saw generally an increase in that sort of behavior from like 52 to 64% of respondents. We see people integrating key data from critical apps. We talk a lot about it's not, all the data, it's right data, right time to inform the CX conversation.
Hallelujah.
Figure out the self-service. I think, we maybe have the same mind that there's a lot of vendors out there selling data integration tools or, charging you for storage on your own data. Sort of singing from the hymn book, which is, yeah, you need everything. You need everything in this, walled garden that I will create for you. We don't believe that. I don't believe that, right? I think, there are these key pieces that are going to drive interaction and make things better. But your CIO is just way too busy to be putting, 5 pounds of data in a 3 pound bucket and carrying it around for you every day, right? It's just expensive and annoying.
Sure. But I mean, I remember kind of to that point, I remember talking to a gentleman who was called Yasha Kekas Wolf, who was the former CMO of Mozilla. He was at the Mozilla at the time back in 2000. I think it was 7 problems.
Whoa.
And he was talking about, Mozilla were talking about this idea of lean data. The idea is like, only use the data that you need. And I just, at the time, I was a bit like, well, that sort of makes sense. And in a really straightforward way. I mean, I think I love Mozilla and some of the stuff that they do at the foundation stuff, because it's like, it is sort of like out there and it's sort of, it's not beholden to anybody other than just kind of like best practice in many ways. And I think that idea has stood the test of time.
I think it has. It's also, I think it's prescient, right? Because more and more what we're seeing out there in data land is that users are permissioning you to know them and understand them and have access to their demographics on a temporary basis, right? GDPR, the right to be forgotten, is becoming significant and important. And where Europe goes, the US follows now on privacy, right? Not rapidly, but it definitely does. And so I think this idea of just personal data ephemerality will destroy to a certain extent the traditional notions of a system of record in CX. And people are going to have to think differently about, how do I have the data in the moment at this time to run this inquiry, right? I think eventually users will be permissioning us to see their, shipping address or to understand things about them, or in the same way that maybe crypto wallets basically give you temporary and private access, and it is then removed when those hashes are wiped out. I think that is the future. There's a reason why, Signal and Telegram, which are possibly the, 14th and 15th best chat apps that are available for your phone, are actually the fastest growing. Their key feature is privacy, right? And people want privacy.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is that sort of, I think there's a middle line kind of there, because I think and it's the sort of nature of the world, it's either here or it's here. It's a very binary thing. But I think there's a middle line where people kind of like, I sort of understand it, but haven't really gotten it as yet. And that's the idea of like, we need to understand what trust means for you and how we can earn your trust and keep earning your trust. And therefore you will allow us to be a custodian of your data on terms that you dictate, rather than just going, we'll take your data, we'll suck it all up like a big Hoover, and then we'll kind of like spray some stuff back at you, hoping that it sticks. And I think that becomes a tricky sort of thing, and then it plays into the whole sort of thing around personalization and kind of how you do it and on whose terms it is, and how you understand it, all those different sort of things. But it's changing because, as you say, even the champions are struggling to keep up with the rising expectations. And I sort of wanted to circle back to that because even if the leaders that you found in your survey are struggling to keep up with expectations, even they've got a more sophisticated kind of view on it and they're implementing kind of technology to try and help with those kind of handovers as much as kind of possible. What's driving some of those expectations and that kind of, I guess, the volume in the market if they're not being able to keep up? Because technology and AI and everything else and the automation and so on and so forth has taken big leaps and bounds on, but you're implying that even the people that are leading their fields are drowning. Like 157% of unresolved queries up year on year, something that's wild.
Yeah, our hypothesis from data, is that it's possibly the biggest driver of customer expectations, right? 66% of respondents to our survey claim that customers are less patient in their actions with service teams. And companies are 18% more likely to report customer satisfaction is below expectations.
Right.
So what is, I can pontificate a hypothesis there, right? Which is that, let's go back to 20, 25 years ago or whatever, when we all first started using this user interface, which is a small empty box, text box that we type into, and then that will show us the information that we're looking for. What's happened is that we as a society got trained by the Google search box how to find things we were looking for, how to structure queries, right? How to use basically what is a complex query language inside of those boxes and be successful. There's the meme or the thing that people do, which is like, when someone asks you something, you're like, well, let me Google that for you. And it sends back the response, right? We trained ourselves in society, like the machines trained us in a certain way. I think through the pandemic, and this shift to digital, which was rapidly accelerated, customers basically, the customer served public, and there are billions of them, started having all of these great experiences. People who'd never used mature food delivery apps suddenly use them 3 times a week, and they're like, wow, these people have that, they have it together, right? I can see the status of my order in the app. I can see where it is. I can see where things are happening. And, slowly but surely, expectations were raised, right? The mental model of what to expect as an outcome, I think, changed for people. And so, customers what we see is that they reach out on multiple channels at the same time. I think that they set a challenge for CX teams to sort of pull from all of these channels that information together and draw it into something and respond. And then customers expect to be able to give feedback. And, champions in our survey are 2.5 times more likely to respond to feedback. And, we've worked with some amazing organizations, right, that kind of handle this, whether it's Lush, the fragrant brand that you probably still see in British high streets. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I think I sometimes think I walk past a Lush store and they should be done for kind of olfactory GBH.
I find them delightful.
Oh well, of course you would.
That's
of course you would. I mean, I'm just a bit like going, I am just not kind of a big fan of pomegranate bath bombs, kind of like that. Oh, that's that type of stuff. I mean, but like fair play, they're usually kind of busy and they've got their massive fans and things. And I mean, they're great at some of the stuff that they do. And I love some of the stands that they take and how they operate and things.
Exactly.
But from an olfactory perspective, when I walk past, I'm like, oh my God, I think it's you definitely notice them and you definitely remember them.
Yeah, exactly. I think what extraordinary branding. And then part of that is management of that branding and that reputation, right? So every time a customer praises a member of staff in a store, that experience is captured and can be forwarded, in this case, through Zendesk, right? And their CSAT score is like almost 92%.
Wow.
Well above like the sort of average 70 to 75 reported by retailers, right? And during COVID, the score stayed the same. So I think it's, you can manage these expectations you can respond, but I think what we're seeing is that with those expectations, right, you're going to then have to say, well, do I have the right data to drive enough context, right? Am I automating enough? Am I driving enough self-service? And is my agent population appropriately trained, enabled, and skilled to be able to do this?
But the thing, because I was talking to somebody else about the sort of this idea about rising expectations or runaway expectations, and somebody else that I was talking to kind of was talking about this idea of rising neglect, as it were. And I was a bit like, it sort of made me think, it was like going this rising neglect, but then you talk about rising kind of expectations, and I was a bit like, well, they're sort of connected, right? And I was like going, but what are people, it made me think, but what are people doing about setting and managing expectations? And do you think, because there is, yes, you're absolutely right that there are other brands out there that are just kind of nailing it in certain kind of aspects of it, and they're like you talked about the delivery apps that are just have their provision of information, their design and the UI UX sort of just kind of it just all feels like very intuitive, and that's kind of nailed, and that's sort of those experiences are bleeding into other sort of spaces. But it feels to me sometimes, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, that many brands don't actually try and set and manage expectations, or rather don't do a particularly good job of it, and therefore they get what they get given in many ways.
I think that everyone has objectives in the way that they think about customer service, right? Everyone has set some kind of expectations, and it's a question of internally, how are they managing that, right? Like what the variance between the best and worst companies in terms of how they measure KPIs. Do they have KPIs, right? How rapidly do they measure them? The starters in our survey, sort of the worst performing companies in terms of investment, if they have reporting, it's likely to be batched or historical, right? I think you can't often drive the CX car looking in the rearview mirror. It's a little bit difficult. You need to respond faster than that. And so part of it comes from understanding what your goals are and what your level of investment is. And still to this, sometimes it's surprising, but then sometimes it isn't, right? That so many companies don't see service as a driver of business. They see it as a cost center. And fundamentally, that's sort of the philosophical problem, right?
Yeah.
Zendesk customer-wise, if you take a Liberty, I think that's a brick and mortar store in London that has this fantastic reputation for customer service, truly understands, digital or in person, that it drives the brand and growth, and it is who they are, right? I think for a lot of other companies, CX is disconnected. Like we've mostly gone beyond outsourced bunkers in cheap labor locations, providing kind of average to kind of not great service, but we still haven't gotten to the point that the champions in our survey are at, where they're using their CS agents to upsell, cross-sell, display product knowledge, like give good experiences, and they're also empowering them really to make key decisions in that conversation, in that moment with the customer, which I think is extremely important. And definitely the best brands that you could think of in the CX world, the agents are trained, right? All of our champions basically in the UK said they had adequate training for their agents, and I think that also implies they have adequate empowerment.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the rising expectations is the kind of is one of the big things you say that even the champions are struggling to keep up with. But if I ask you to cast your mind back, I mean, actually, point of note, do you do this annually, or is it just was it done was the last time you did it in 2020, or did you do it in 2021 as well?
We did it in 21 as well.
Oh, I completely missed that. Oh, I'm sorry. Ooh, he says, looking slightly embarrassed. Never mind.
That's all right. It's good to take a year off, Matt. There's only so many Adrians people can take.
Oh, well, exactly. Anyway, well, let's kind of my question was going to be, given that we spoke 2 years ago about this, I mean, what was the what have been some of the big changes over the last kind of couple of years based on, I mean, 2020 was an extraordinary year. And this we talked at the towards the end of the year, and now we're in the latter part of 2022. What have been the big changes in the, I guess, in the champion space, kind of between over those course of those last 2 years?
I think champions really have in the past year. It's in the champion data that we see people, um, you know, deploying bots. You know,
Mhm.
that the bot to human handoff deployment increased, but also at the same time, 66% of them saying customers are less patient, right?
Right.
Um, Customer satisfaction kind of as a global index dropped, and those things, those metrics did well 20 to 21, right? It's
Mhm.
21 to 22 where we saw these changes, and we saw satisfaction drop off. But at the same time, you know, the champions have invested in metrics, KPIs, and understanding satisfaction. So, you know, there's always this idea that is this reporting bias because they're actually just doing a better job of tracking. It's
Mhm.
not that it's, you know, and I don't think it is, right? I have sort of a theory that comes a little bit as well from work that we've been doing in our artificial intelligence lab, right? Which is we we deployed some technology to sort of think about, well, when an inquiry starts, um, you know, and a customer reaches out to you, um, you know, what you want to do with a bot, say, that handles email, or
Mhm.
a piece of AI that handles email, is basically you want to establish kind of three things. Firstly, you know, what languages it's in for routing, obviously. So language detection. Secondly, you want to understand the intent.
Mhm.
What is this customer trying to do? Like, what is the thing that they're asking? And then finally, you want to understand their sentiment. Like all of these things, you know, all technology has rapidly improved in artificial intelligence, and all of these things are available to you. And as we started doing that, as our team was working on it, they realized that, you know, intents vary by use case, by vertical, you know, different intents for retail versus financial services versus, you know, an employee internal implementation for a benefit help desk or something else. But each sort of help desk has, you know, you could kind of think about between 60 and 300 intents. And then you can aggregate all those intents together. So if you think about that, right? The job of customer service is to establish identity, obviously understand sentiment and language to get to that point of understanding intent, and then propose or run through an action. So it's intent to action.
Mhm.
And so we've built this taxonomy of intent. I have a return. I have a product problem. I want to change my password. I want to change my credit card. Um, you know, my delivery is late. These kind of things. So if you take the 60, 100 intents and map them out, I think what we need to recognize as we think more and more about user sentiment is that I think in 2022, the average person coming into customer service implementation, you know, because their package didn't arrive, or, you know, the shoe didn't fit, whatever it is, they have an a priori model in their head. They have a model in their head that says, for this type of problem, I expect this type of outcome, and I expect it to happen like this. You know,
Mm.
if it's a return, the best retailers, I will never talk to anyone. I will, like, it will tell me how to do a return on the self-service website. It will show me my latest order. I will pick the thing I want to return. It will, like, send me the shipping label and tell me where to drop it off, and boom, I will be done, right? And it will take 3 to 5 minutes. You know, the worst one, I've got to get on the phone. I've got to have a conversation with someone. I've got to do something else, right?
Mhm.
And so,
Oh, you gotta find the phone number first.
exactly. So I think the served public, whether they're employees, citizens, customers, partners, the served public has developed in rapidly in the last couple of years and evolved and improved their mental models of intent to action mappings. And every customer service implementation, in my opinion, is now judged by that mental model of intent to action.
Right.
And if you are adding friction into your implementation, if your implementation isn't meeting those expectations for the 250 outcomes for your help desk, for your customer service implementation, your customer satisfaction is going to go down. Your users are going to think about migrating, right? Frequency of user migration is one of the statistics that just goes up and up and up in our survey, right? And that's a little scary, right? Because the bar is just raising and raising and raising for what is expected by our customers and where they want us to go. And so we've been thinking a lot and growing out our intent model internally and exposing it in the product, because we want to get to a point where we can really sort of help customers get to one-touch revolution, to automate, to drive self-service, because that is what we expect as a consuming public, measured against the greats of CX land that we play with and that we've experienced.
And so, yeah, because I mean, I've seen it in other data where people other data had said that, massive shift to digital. I think people were in 2020, and there was progress that was made, and then things ebbed back. Now you could say that some of that progress that was made you may need to temper that with the idea that it was like things were changing, things changed, but they did set another kind of bar off, and because the rate of change didn't continue, that actually it's ebbed a little bit. And that sort of it adds kind of pressure to it. But I mean, from your research and your sort of the work around the intent to action type of kind of model, I mean, what do you think that firms should be doing to jump ahead?
I think
it's not about catching up, because almost it's accelerating away. You almost need to think differently. We need to go. Could almost like take a leap forward in many ways.
Yeah, and I think that we have consistently sort of tried to pull out and publish really what are the characteristics of the best customer service implementations. How are they working and what are they doing, right? And so then it comes down to, well, what is their investment in their people, right? Are the skills appropriate and correct, right? So as we said in the UK, all of our champions say that they have enough training, right? And then next thing is knowledge, right? Does your team have great CX? Does the CX team have great product knowledge? Can they find the answers quickly? Can they do things, right? Like what is that could be, have they integrated? I think the average is something like 6 to 15 apps need to get integrated to give a perfect view of customer journey, birthday survey data, which when you think about it is a heavy lift. But at the same time, CX platforms like Zendesk have app stores, they have SDKs and abilities to be able to do that. But obviously, that's the kind of investment that people need to be making. And then I think it's technology, right? Does the technology support CX agents being able to drive the conversation in a successful way, to figure out outcome and to resolve that outcome? We're believers in sort of automated triage to human escalation, and also believers in kind of driving as much of the CX work through self-service as possible. It's a better experience and people prefer that experience, right? One of our customers in the UK, your parking space, right? They're using metrics and KPI to figure out, if you don't find a way to deflect or solve requests through automation, you're going to need human power, right? And so they're trying to make it so that the only queries that land with human agents are those that require specialist knowledge and experience. Their one-touch resolution sits at about 85%. But obviously, they invested and they made that a goal. And they understood the needs and expectations of their users and the mental model that they had when they came in. about what would happen, and that's all the while, for them, while bookings increased over 46% between December and May 21 to 22.
Mm.
So you can do it, but back to that, is it a cost center or is it seen as a driver? I think it takes a top-down, C-suite driven investment in CX and understanding of the importance of CX to grow the business, and to improve, the fact that improving customer experience will drive some kind of loyalty, repeat business, and deal with churn.
Yeah. I think I think you're right. When you talk about your parking space, I think the kind of interesting kind of thing is that, and if you think about the idea of using that app to try and book a piece of parking and then something goes wrong, there's no way you want to be emailing somebody or waiting in a phone queue when you're trying to sort parking out. You want that one touch sort of thing. So it's almost a bit like, I love it when people kind of like have envisaged what they want to happen and then also have envisaged what could happen when things go wrong, and then actually kind of fold all that into into their thinking, because it's only then when you get this sort of the level of, I feel like, the nuanced and the sophisticated kind of understanding of what it is you're trying to actually kind of like deliver.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, that's why I think some of my favorite partners out in Zendesk customer land, they think about the CX managers as product managers, and they use traditional software product manager thinking to say, all right, what is the, which of our tickets have the longest resolution time or are causing us the most problem, or what's sort of the 80/20 on inbound inquiries that we can
mhm,
resolve. And then they have sort of the reach, the power, the agency to take those inquiries and turn them into features in the product, right? Because basically, building that extension to your piece of software that takes you from a challenge with your credit card in the app when you're booking a parking space to resolution in the app, full circle, without ever needing to sort of, even, what's really nice is when you see people using, we have messaging SDKs so that you could be in the app and using that, or other sort of ways of building technology that, obviates the need for a customer inquiry. I think when you can have it sitting in your application and, as we jokingly say, you're not breaking the Brechtian fourth wall of the, your parking space experience. It's all taking place on the stage in the app. I think when you can do that, you're really meeting customer expectations, having a good outcome. And also, the more you can drive that deflection or that one-touch resolution, you're going to increase customer satisfaction, reduce cost, and you could spend more time. You can have your humans spending more time on the things that actually require special knowledge, experience,
mhm,
or thinking about what's the next piece of content, if you're using knowledge-centered support, that we can build that will help someone self-serve or discover what's going on.
yeah. Um, so Adrian, the other thing I wanted to ask, I wanted to kind of like zoom back a little bit, or actually circle back a little bit on the kind of you mentioned training, and I wanted to understand about that training. We thought people invest in training, and I think I completely get that, because you talked about sort of product and you talked about kind of systems and stuff. I mean, when you say training, what are they investing kind of in? I mean, is that comms training, soft skills, product systems, or is it like the whole thing? It's just that they're just giving everybody everything that they need in order to succeed.
I think it is all of the above. I mean, I'm I think that the best experiences I have with our customers when I take on the role of part of like the being served public. When I have an inquiry, I go, and the self-service guide site, is the FAQ, the knowledge base is completely obvious. It's easy to find. It's most of the answers are there, almost all the answers are there. It's really clear. That's a manifestation for me of good practice, where there's a feedback loop where agents are writing into that and agents are helping each other. And
Mhm,
so knowledge begins with a shift that started a while ago, but really accelerated in the pandemic, which is that, during that period, people moved from the oral tradition of customer service agent enablement, right? Where it was generally all people in the room with the team lead. They'd have a meeting, they'd share like what's coming up at the moment. There would be cave paintings on whiteboards that people would refer to. There were pieces of paper handed around. I think when we moved into the distributed world, people got much more disciplined about what is the corpus of knowledge that enables people to know things that someone else has already learned.
Mhm.
And I think, do they have the time to absorb that, or do they have the tools to be able to find it? For me, that knowledge is the single most important enabler for agents, right? Secondly, yes, they need to be able to, people are often calling about a product, right? One of the products that you sell or offer or whatever services. And I think that training in particular is extremely important, right? I know, at Zendesk, right, we've launched features and then not all of the service team has been enabled, right? And it's been a disaster. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard than that. And that's a thing that we've been trying to fix.
Awesome.
And then, yes, then there are skills on sort of, customer handling, dealing with frustrated customers and these kind of things. And that's one of the reasons that we are putting a bunch of effort and research and emphasis into establishing customer sentiment at first point of contact or in those flows, right? It's incredibly important that you route customers with extreme sentiment to agents who have experience in handling those things and go beyond.
Yeah.
And then I think finally, like, your agents need to understand, if everyone is using, 6 to 15 apps to answer inquiries, you'd better make sure that your agents, whether they're first party or third party, are dropping in and they know how to find data in all of these applications. That's just an incredibly complex landscape
Mhm.
to be using, right? And it's extremely important that investments are made in that. And those things, they take time, they take staff to put together the materials, to take all of these things, and it has to be part of the customer service budget and the way that people think about creating an environment for their agents in which they can represent the brand well and be successful.
Perfect. Thank you. So, I mean, you mentioned a couple of, I guess, champion brands that you work with. I mean, are there any other sort of examples that and of champions that you would like to sort of like highlight? You just go, I think they're great, and we can learn a lot from them. And they're kind of like they've improved a lot because they've done the X, Y, and Z, and they're maybe a newly minted champion. Perhaps that's always a good story.
Mm. Well, the one, in UK land, the one that I'm just really excited about right now, actually, and sort of into, just because it is such an iconic brand, is Liberty of London. Part of the reason for that is, they were originally running customer service from a switchboard with a shared email inbox,
Right.
um, which is that's where a lot of our business comes from, not going to lie.
Hmm.
And, as they began to integrate sort of email, voice channels into and kind of get a sense of what was happening. And then also as they distributed people out of the office and, and sent them home with laptops, and their inquiries spiked. I think they learned a ton about how to run service in that way, right? And they managed to, basically increase their satisfaction score in this survey year 9% year over year. And their first response time went down 73%. And they saved, £16,000 in help center costs by running more efficiently.
Hmm.
And so, you could have it all, right? With great planning, great organization, and great execution. And that's, honestly, the kind of story that I love, is like people who, it's not just like, you go to that annual budget meeting and you ask for money for the software tool and then everything kind of stays the same. It's like you can make all of your metrics better, including costs, by being smart about implementation and really planning and understanding who you are as a brand and what the outcome is that you're looking for.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's you said the last word or the last kind of phrase that being clear about the outcome you're looking for is
Mhm.
I think for me is the key to it, because otherwise you see people can almost like watching their metrics rather than actually thinking about where they want to get to, as it were. It's a bit like driving your car by watching the speedo and the fuel gauge, and you wonder why you hit a tree.
Yeah, always
Right.
unfortunate.
Yeah. Right. So anything else that we'd like to add about the report? I mean, I guess we can just go on to Zendesk at CX. I mean, I put a link in the highlights as well, but it's CX Accelerator report on the Zendesk site. That should find it.
Yep. And I think, as a CX leader, CX curious, think about where you would sit, and then look at the recommendations for people who are moving from one stage to another.
Hmm.
And we all have different priorities in our business. And so hopefully there are insights at sort of every stage of investment or progress.
Yeah. And I should say that you can do an assessment as well on the site about to understand kind of where you're at as well, and then that
Hmm.
would point you in the right direction as well.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, sort of just backing up and just kind of thinking about kind of things. I mean, as I say, we spoke kind of like nearly 2 years ago, and you know, the world's gone through some massive changes, and I just wanted to ask you, you know, the world also continues to be weird and challenging. And so, what have been some of the biggest lessons, or what's been the biggest lesson that you've learned that's going to inform what you do going forward, or what's the biggest lesson, say, that Zendesk learned over the last couple of years, and that's going to inform what you do going forward?
Well, I've already alluded to it, right? Which is today's consumers have so much customer, CX experience.
Mm,
And they look for experiences that are good and improving and moving to great. Everyone has a mental model um, about the expected action, return, repair, change order, etc., that can come as a result of their inquiry. And um, I think the more we as CX leaders think about understanding and having empathy for that customer position, the better. I think the more that we shift the mindset and the power dynamic in CX, I think this is what is going on. There's sort of there's a power revolution, right? So it used to be I would pick up the phone. I'd be, sitting at my desk with my headset on. I'd be like, "Hi, this is Adrian from Zendesk. Please enter your account number. Please do this. Please do that." Right? What is the order you're calling about today? And this is probably after you've already gone through a phone tree. And what that's indicative of to me is that I, as the agent, am in control of that conversation. I drive it. It happens on my time scale, in my order, and it takes a long time to get to where you want as a consumer. I think our consumers expect something different, right? Which is they expect to be able to come into a CX experience and not go through the every leaf or branch or fork in the tree to get to the point that they want to go. They want to say, I want to return the shoes they don't fit, and then have the CX systems fill in the blanks. Oh, I see that you ordered, this was your order last week. You ordered the size 10 and a half, Stan Smith's, blah, blah, blah. Let's get you to this point, et cetera, et cetera. And you jump straight in, and it's super simple, super easy, right? The key difference is the inversion of the power structure.
hmm
As consumer, you are writing the script. You are driving the conversation. And I think the challenge for the hundreds of thousands of CX departments out there that are really working in the front line right now is understanding that they no longer should be trying to control the conversation. They should be letting the user establish immediate intent and then jumping straight into resolution.
Yeah.
And doing so will increase their satisfaction and grow their business, right? I think you can't do that if you're still viewing service as a cost center. You have to understand that it can grow your business, right? You can't do that if you're not using it as an integration point.
hmm
While at the same time, it's the right data at the right time, not all the data all the time.
Yeah,
Let's not die on data hill. Let's just make sure that we're driving the right conversations forward.
absolutely.
And then question yourself, measure. And through that, like discipline measurement, you understand what are the outcomes that you're trying to actually get to, and does everyone in the company agree?
Hmm. I think that it reminds me of, I think it's, it's music to my ears, but it reminds me also of a conversation that I had with a gentleman by the name of Professor John Seddon, and he said, and he's a big advocate for systems thinking. He said, he sort of summed up the sort of the situation. He says, "Why would you take a customer typology of demand and then try and fit it into the way that you want to do business?"
Mm-hmm.
it's, it's like kind of like smashing a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
And it's exactly that. He's like going, but actually, no, it's like going, if this is a square peg, you've got to give it the right, the right kind of place to plug into. Um, and and that might mean that you end up having to rethink everything you do or re-engineer kind of how you do things
Mm-hmm.
or push more to the front so that people can help themselves. So you end up understanding your customers and giving them what they want and when they want and how they want it and all those kind of things. And so, yeah, more layering on more of the same isn't necessarily going to help you.
It is not. And I think also technology has advanced rapidly.
Hmm.
And so, and consumer, in my opinion, consumer perception of technology has advanced rapidly as well, where a bot that doesn't pretend to be a person, but is an efficient way to do triage and establish intent and move forward is more and more welcomed and seen as a source of efficiency in CX, right? I think for the majority of inquiries, the majority of people are trying to use some kind of are happy to want to have a self-service experience, and want to really happy for that to be driven by a bot to get to the right place.
Hmm. Of
This also frees up agents for high value tasks.
course, absolutely. So, a couple of quick questions before we kind of go, because I know you're a busy guy, and we're kind of like we're running a little bit behind. Um, so the first question is, so I published a follow up to Punk CX late last year called Punk XL, and it explores this idea of what experienced leadership is. And what I wanted to ask you is, what company or brand do you think is an experienced leader, and why?
I'm fascinated by scale, and I'm really into companies that drive experiences into their application and into self-service. And so there's a grocery delivery company in the US, Instacart,
Hmm.
and we worked very closely with them in the pandemic as their volume obviously, you know, increased. Who knows what the statistic is? Manyfold. Let's just put it orders of magnitude manyfold.
Hmm.
And they scaled in a very short period of time. That's a complex problem, right? They sit at the intersection of stores and drivers and customers, and they're doing logistics, they're setting expectations. What at some point they didn't have enough people to do, they were short on people to do deliveries, and there were wait times. But what they've done is figured out what are the intents, what can they do to operationalize the actions that can be taken for those intents, what can they drive into self-service, and then how can they scale those experiences while maintaining customer service CSAT levels in an incredibly competitive market. And I respect that scale a lot. In the same way, actually, the other companies who are driving experiences are that every time I go to a company's website, and hopefully it's a Zendesk guide implementation of self-service, I cheer when it's full and fulsome, and it has the answer to my question, and I don't need to talk to anybody. I'm like, yes, this is what winning looks like for me. Yes, not that I hit people, but
Well, I was going to say, I would just make sure that you point that out.
yeah.
And Thank you for that. And the sort of final question before we can wrap up is that, as I was saying, it's like we're in sort of quite weird and kind of challenging times. And I find myself looking at the news in the morning sometimes over a cup of coffee, and I feel like I'm just it's like doom scrolling. I'm like not looking at
Yeah.
that, not looking at that. So what I've been doing in the last kind of like couple of months is I've been asking people when I've had them on the podcast is like, can we finish on a good news story? And can you tell me what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week?
So in the last week, I got access as a user to the DALI 2 large language model. And so large language models are these, emergent property AI models that can do crazy things. They, are trained on percentages of the internet, 10, 20% of the internet. And, don't obviously have our cognition or understanding, but DALI is a model where you can type in a very specific phrase. I want to see a kangaroo in a red hoodie standing in front of the Sydney Opera House with a sign that says, "Hi, Adrian." And it will generate a photorealistic version of that, or a version of that, in the style of Salvador Dali or whatever. And so I've been playing with it, and I've decided, in my part of my role is to be chief talking officer of Zendesk. That's what CTO stands for sometimes, right?
Okay.
And in that role, I've been using DALI to, instead of making, Google Slides or Keynote or PowerPoint or whatever, I've been using DALI to create these images, like putting in very specific phrases and getting this delightful, beautiful sort of randomness back. That sort of is sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but is always just engaging and will sort of be a fun way to present information and facts. And so for me, and if you haven't signed up yet and started playing with it, it's an open beta. I would say go mess around with AI and it's fun because you can see its limitations. This thing isn't going to be Skynet, but it's also brilliant because it encapsulates, so much information and puts it to use. And I'm excited for the future applications of large language models in CX and how we can drive, super efficient and great experiences.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And for anybody who's listening who doesn't read the highlights, and is thinking DALI, it's not DALI as in Salvador Dali, it's DALLE is the thing to search for.
Yep. That's
perfect. Adrian, thank you for that. And thank you for sharing some insights around the CX Accelerators report and about what champions do and what the challenges they're facing and how to kind of get past that. Nice to speak to you again after a couple of years. And hopefully it's not as long kind of next time. But finally, just wanted to say thank you for sharing your time with us today. That's been super cool.
Thank you, Adrian. Always a pleasure. And the Adri I need to stick together. So, we should keep that union going.
Fantastic. Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.